I'm here with John Eastgate from One Savings Bank, and I was interested, John, to get your view on an evergreen topic, and that is that in property there are many uncertainties, many things that are hard to quantify, but the one thing you can actually rely on is that numbers will never lie. Maths will always tell you the truth. And this is very important for property investors when they're considering potential investments.
Yes, and arguably more so than ever with the changes to taxation, which have clearly made things rather more tight than they historically were. I think that landlords need to always remember that the property that they are considering purchasing is a property to rent and not a property for them to live in. So it ceases to be about the emotion of personal taste, and it's about whether or not, actually, as a business proposition, whether or not it stacks up, after allowing for all the costs that you can possibly contemplate, and probably adding on a bit more for the ones that you haven't contemplated, just for good luck, then is the rent really going to cover those costs and provide you with a little bit of income on top? Because businesses don't go down because of profit and loss accounts. Businesses go down because they do or do not have cash.
You've hit on that all-important thing that cash flow, net cash flow, month on month, is hugely important. It's the lifeblood of a business. But not only that, your Buy to Let Britain report suggested that landlords may have to stay in the game a lot longer than previously in order to really benefit from their investments. And on that basis, if you have good, solid net cash flow month on month, you're likely to be able to survive longer if conditions change again.
Yes, you are, and the professional landlord community that we serve typically does recognise that, and we see them with relatively modest levels of gearing, and we also see them typically with relatively large cash reserves available to them just for that precise purpose. But these are portfolios that they've built up over many years, and they've entered into it with an appropriate long-term perspective. So if for a new investor contemplating going into the buy-to-let market, I'd say yes, there is a return still to be made in the buy-to-let market, notwithstanding all the interventions that it's seen in the last 2 or 3 years. But you need to look at it with a long-term view and think about holding that property for 10, 15, 20 years before you're going to see a meaningful return on that.
Indeed. So for a first-timer landlord, the first thing that I would recommend they do is when they're looking at properties on, say, Rightmove, is to actually stack that deal and see how it stacks up and what the positive net cash flow is going to be month on month. Because if it doesn't stack up, then there's actually no point in going to view that property.
Just stop there and then, because you can't pin your investment hopes on some house price appreciation or something like that, because you won't be able to hold the property long enough to benefit from that, and it's speculative anyway. You need to deal in the real and in the here and now, and the real and the here and now is how much is it going to cost you a month and how much rent are you going to get in to cover that.
Indeed. I'm interested to know the bank's view actually on tenanted properties, because one thing about a tenanted property is that if you're going to take it over from another landlord, you do know exactly what rent you're achieving, what your yield is. How does One Savings Bank, your buy-to-let brands, how do they feel about tenanted properties? Do you consider them?
So in our underwriting process, we will obviously take a valuation, and the valuation will include a valuer's estimate of the monthly rent, and we will typically use that figure. Where the market rent that's already been generated by the property differs from that, or is greater than that, then in certain circumstances we will take that, or take a proportion of that delta and add it to the market rent that the surveyor has provided to us. Now, all of our underwriting is done manually anyway, so actually we can deal with individual cases on a case-by-case basis, and that means typically we will look at a landlord's situation in the round anyway. So the fact that a landlord might be coming to us with a property and the valuer might be 10% down on the rent compared to what the market rent is often becomes a non-issue, because by the time we've looked at the landlord's residual portfolio and validated the rents on that, and we have some very quick and efficient tools that enable that to be done without any significant intrusion on the landlord or even the mortgage broker, we can arrive at very quick decisions that actually render any deltas between the market rent and the valuer's opinion on rent as is insignificant.
But there is a bit of a myth that lenders don't like tenanted properties. What's the bank's view on that?
Well, we're taking tenanted properties all the time. Yeah, I mean, it's not really an issue for us.
Okay, well that's very good to know. I think one of the other ways that I use numbers is I use them to help me determine what I'm willing to pay for a property, because the rent is the best indicator of the level of borrowing that can be undertaken for that particular property. And I'll put some deal stacking calculations underneath this video because I've done some ready-made ones to help everybody out. But if you actually look at what level of borrowing the rent will support, that's also a good kind of indicator of what sort of price you might be willing to offer for that property, what it's worth to you as an investment to offer for it.
Yes, and I'd be looking around at other properties in the locale as well to make sure that there isn't something odd stand out about the individual property that you're looking at as well. But it's clearly it's essential that the yield on the property will vary depending on where you are, and that can have, and that will materially impact on how much you need to put in, how much rent you're going to require to in terms of to the purchase, how much rent you're going to require to service the debt that you end up with.
So I think we were both quite keen to record that on this topic, John, because as you indicated in one of our previous interviews, the arithmetic is getting tighter.
Yes.
There's less margin for error. And this is something that landlords really need to get to grips with in the due diligence phase when they are looking at potential investments.
Yes, I mean, apart from the financial costs that landlords need to be thinking about, void costs, maintenance costs, a bit for the costs they haven't thought of costs, everything is, and then the tax bill, because January 2019 is going to be interesting for a lot of landlords, I suspect, when they work out that they had a tax bill that they hadn't fully realised they were going to have. A few moments of truth, I'm sure, will come about then. All of these things need to be thought about in really great detail. It's a if you're not good with Excel, then find a friend who is.
Absolutely. I think also, just to close out on a point you made earlier, that numbers, maths, arithmetic, it strips away all the emotion, and so you can't get really stuck into a property that you've kind of really appealed to your heart if the numbers don't work. But I'm going to add a caveat to that. I always say that I wouldn't buy a property that I wouldn't be prepared to live in myself. And I do my own little checks about going there at different times of the night. How would I feel walking home from the station to that property at night? Maybe how would a female tenant feel coming back to the property late at night? These are all things you can add into the mix once you know that the numbers stack.
I think that's a very valid point, and that arguably comes back to another point I firmly believe in, which is, as a landlord, you have an obligation to your tenant, and that's not just to provide a roof over the head, but it's actually to provide a good roof over the head, safe environment, and a house, property, flat, whatever it may be, that they actually want to be in. And it's a mindset thing for landlords. For me, I think your tenant isn't just the people, are not just the people who pay the rent. The tenants are people who matter to you. They're your customers.
Well, we totally subscribe to that philosophy, John. Really good to have your input here. And interesting times for landlords ahead, but doing a bit of number crunching could potentially save, heartache, financial loss, and actually get you into a better deal from day one.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Well, thank you very much for sharing those insights, and we'll put some related links underneath this video for you to check out our kind of number crunching, deal stacking calculations, because they're very, very useful to help you do your due diligence right at the start and make sure that your deal stacks up.